Welcome to a journey into the deepest reaches of human memory, a place where history and myth intertwine so tightly that it becomes difficult to see where one ends and the other begins. Tonight we are going to explore one of the most controversial and fascinating subjects in the history of ancient civilizations, the Anunnaki. Before we begin, I want you to take a moment to truly settle in. If you are listening to this to relax or to find sleep, make sure your environment is prepared. Dim the lights, adjust your pillows, and perhaps turn on a fan or a white noise machine to create a soft, consistent hum in the background. Allow the weight of your body to sink into your bed, letting go of the tensions of the day. We are about to leave the modern world behind and travel back thousands of years to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, to the land between two rivers, where the first words were carved into clay and the first stories of the gods were told. Before we dive into the dusty archives of the past, please take a second to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you find value in these long-form explorations, a like on the video helps more than you know. Also, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is for you. There is something deeply comforting about knowing that while we sit in the quiet of the night, people from every corner of the globe are joined together by the same curiosity, looking back at the same ancient stars. The story of the Anunnaki has, in recent decades, become a cornerstone of modern conspiracy theories and ancient astronaut narratives. We see their names in books, on television specials, and across the vast expanses of the internet, often portrayed as extraterrestrial visitors who descended from the heavens to mine gold and genetically engineer humanity. But tonight, we are going to look past the sensationalism. We are going to look past the theories of Zecharia Sitchin and the dramatic interpretations of the History Channel. Our goal is to return to the source, to the actual cuneiform tablets that lay buried under the sands of Iraq for millennia. We will examine what the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and the Babylonians actually wrote about these beings. We will seek to understand the distinction between the myth created in the 20th century and the facts preserved in the oldest writing system known to man. It is a journey that requires patience and a willingness to look at the nuances of language and culture. The Anunnaki were not merely characters in a story. They were the foundational pillars of a worldview that shaped the very dawn of civilization. To understand them is to understand how our ancestors perceived the forces of nature, the structure of society, and the terrifying mystery of existence itself. To truly begin our investigation, we must first understand the world in which the Anunnaki first appeared. Imagine the city-states of Sumer, Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, rising like islands of mud brick and reed from the marshes of the Persian Gulf. This was a world where the gods were not distant or abstract. They were the owners of the cities, the masters of the weather, and the ultimate arbiters of fate. The term Anunnaki itself is a linguistic puzzle that reveals much about their perceived nature. Derived from the Sumerian An, meaning sky or heaven, and Naki, often interpreted as those of princely offspring, or those who from heaven to earth came, the name immediately establishes a hierarchy. In the earlier Sumerian texts, they are the great gods, the cosmic royalty who sat in council to decide the destiny of the world. However, as we delve into the texts, we find that the definition of the Anunnaki changed over time, shifting from a general term for the pantheon to a specific group of deities associated with the underworld and the judgment of the dead. This fluidity is our first clue that the facts of the Anunnaki are far more complex than a simple story of alien visitors. They represent a shifting theological landscape that evolved as Sumerian culture was absorbed and transformed by the Akkadians and later the Babylonians. The rediscovery of the Anunnaki began not in the stars, but in the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh during the mid-19th century. Archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard and Henry Rawlinson unearthed thousands of clay tablets, many of them shattered into fragments, which held the lost literature of Mesopotamia. Among these fragments were the great epics, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. When these texts were first translated, they sent shockwaves through the Victorian world. Here were stories of a great flood, the creation of man from clay, and a council of gods that bore a striking resemblance to the narratives found in the Hebrew Bible. Yet they were significantly older. This is where the modern myth-making began. The realization that our foundational religious stories had precursors in ancient Sumer led many to wonder if there was an even deeper, more literal truth hidden within the metaphors. In the late 20th century, Zecharia Sitchin famously proposed that the Anunnaki were inhabitants of a hidden planet called Nibiru, and that the Sumerian texts were not myths, but historical records of an alien colonization. While these theories have captured the public imagination and provided the basis for countless science fiction stories, they often rely on highly unconventional translations that professional Sumerologists and linguists almost universally reject. Tonight, we choose the path of the evidence, looking at what the scribes themselves intended to convey when they pressed their reeds into the wet clay. In the Sumerian worldview, the Anunnaki were the offspring of An and Ki, the personifications of the sky and the earth. In the very beginning, before the heavens were separated from the earth, there was only the primordial sea, Namu. From this sea, the cosmic mountain emerged, and from the union of sky and earth, the Anunnaki were born. This is not a story of space travel, but a poetic attempt to explain the origin of the physical world. The Anunnaki were the forces of the universe, given form and personality. Enlil was the storm and the air. Enki was the fresh water and the wisdom of the deep. And Ninhursag was the fertile earth and the mother of all living things. They were the architects of order in a chaotic world. In the earliest myths, such as the Enki and the world order, we see the Anunnaki assigning tasks to the lesser gods and establishing the functions of the rivers, the fields, and the cities. There is a sense of cosmic bureaucracy at play here, a reflection of the highly organized and hierarchical nature of Sumerian society itself. The gods did not just exist, they worked. They managed the complex irrigation systems that allowed civilization to flourish in the desert, and they expected humanity to serve as their assistants in this monumental task. One of the most significant distinctions we must make when separating myth from fact is the role of the Igigi. In the Akkadian epic of Atrahasis, we learn that before humans were created, the Anunnaki forced the younger gods, known as the Igigi, to do the heavy labour of the earth. They dug the canals, they hauled the silt, and they toiled under the sun for thousands of years. Eventually, the Igigi rebelled. They burned their tools and surrounded the temple of Enlil, demanding relief from their endless labour. It was this crisis that led to the creation of humanity. Enki, the clever god of the abyss, proposed a solution. They would create a Lulu, a primitive worker, by mixing the blood of a sacrificed god with clay. This worker would take up the yoke of the Igigi and allow the gods to rest. This narrative is often cited by ancient astronaut theorists as evidence of genetic engineering, but within the context of Mesopotamian culture, it serves a very different purpose. It explains the human condition, the reason why we must toil, why we are mortal, and why we are beholden to the divine. The fact of the text is a theological explanation for the hardship of life, wrapped in a mythic narrative about the labour disputes of the gods. As we linger in this ancient space, it is important to realise that for the people of Sumer and Babylon, the Anunnaki were not a matter of belief in the modern sense. They were a matter of reality. Their presence was felt in every drought, every harvest, and every rising tide of the Euphrates. The temples, known as ziggurats, were not just places of worship. They were the literal homes of the gods on earth. The priests treated the statues of the Anunnaki as living beings, feeding them, clothing them, and entertaining them with music and incense. This intimacy with the divine is something we have largely lost in the modern era, but it is essential to understanding why these myths were so powerful. They were the language through which the ancients spoke to the universe. When we read about the Anunnaki sitting in judgment, we are seeing a reflection of the Sumerian legal system. When we read about their petty jealousies and grand ambitions, we are seeing a reflection of the human heart. The myths are the mirrors of the facts of human experience. By studying them, we are not just learning about ancient gods. We are learning about the very origins of the human psyche and the first attempts to codify the laws of nature and society. The transition from the Sumerian Anunna to the Babylonian Anunnaki marked a significant shift in their character. In later periods, the Anunnaki became more closely associated with the 7 judges of the underworld, the shadowy realm of Akkala. This is where the mystery deepens. Why did the great princely offspring of the sky become the grim overseers of the dead? This evolution reflects the changing anxieties of a civilization that was becoming more aware of its own mortality and the harsh realities of empire. The gods who once managed the irrigation canals were now the ones who decided the fate of the soul in the afterlife. In the descent of Ishtar to the underworld, the Anunnaki are described as sitting before Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, their faces grim as they deliver their verdicts. This aspect of the Anunnaki is often ignored by modern theorists who prefer the image of spacefaring teachers, yet it is a crucial fact of the historical record. They represented the ultimate authority, the final word from which there was no appeal, whether in the brightness of the midday sun or the absolute darkness of the grave. As we conclude this first part of our exploration, we have laid the foundation for a deeper understanding. We have looked at the linguistic roots of the Anunnaki, the history of their rediscovery in the 19th century, and the fundamental differences between the modern ancient astronaut myths and the actual Mesopotamian texts. We have seen how they functioned as both cosmic architects and underworld judges, and how their stories were used to explain the creation of man and the necessity of labour. But there is so much more to uncover. We have yet to explore the specific legends of Enki and Enlil in detail, the mysterious me, or divine decrees that they guarded so fiercely, and the true nature of the Abzu, the subterranean ocean from which all wisdom was said to flow. The clay still has much to tell us, and the echoes of the ancient world are still ringing for those who are quiet enough to listen. For now, let the images of the sun-drenched ziggurats and the flickering oil lamps of the Nineveh Library fill your mind. We are just beginning to scratch the surface of the truth, moving steadily away from the comfortable fantasies of the modern age and toward the profound and complex reality of the people who first looked up at the stars and called them by name. Let the silence of the desert night settle over you as we prepare to venture further into the heart of the Sumerian mystery, as we move deeper into the quiet hours of our exploration, leaving the surface-level definitions behind. We must descend into the murky, fertile depths of the Sumerian psyche to meet the figure who arguably defines the Anunnaki narrative more than any other, Enki, the lord of the earth and the master of the Abzu. In the modern ancient astronaut mythos, Enki is often cast as the benevolent geneticist, the rebel scientist who took pity on a primitive species and gifted them with the spark of intelligence. But when we look at the actual cuneiform records found in the ruins of Eridu, the oldest city in the world, according to the Sumerians, we find a character far more nuanced and grounded in the physical reality of the Mesopotamian landscape. To understand Enki is to understand the Abzu, a concept that is frequently misunderstood in popular culture. In Sitchin's interpretations, the Abzu was often described as a laboratory or a gold mine located in Africa, but the linguistic and archaeological facts tell a very different story. The word Ab means water or ocean, and Zu means deep or far. Together they describe the vast reservoir of fresh groundwater that lay beneath the earth's surface. For the Sumerians living in a parched desert, this fresh water was the very source of life itself. It was the water that fed the marshes, fueled the springs, and allowed the date palms to flourish. Enki was the personification of this hidden, life-giving depth. He was not a visitor from another planet. He was the master of the subterranean realm that sustained the world above. When we read the hymn to the Abzu, we see descriptions of his temple in Eridu that are breathtaking in their architectural detail. The text tells us of a house built of silver and lapis lazuli, standing by the edge of the marshes, where the fish gambol in the reeds and the birds sing in the courtyard. This was not a cold metallic spaceship, but a sanctuary of nature and wisdom, a place where the physical waters of the earth met the spiritual waters of divine intelligence. The brilliance of Enki lies in his role as the god of Me, pronounced as Me. These Me are perhaps the most fascinating and misunderstood elements of the entire Anunnaki legacy. In modern theories, they are sometimes described as data disks or compact programs containing the technological blueprints for civilization. While this is a compelling sci-fi metaphor, the historical reality is even more profound. The Me were the fundamental decrees of civilization, the invisible blueprints that governed everything from the art of kingship and the rights of the priesthood to the mundane skills of the weaver, the smith, and even the concept of truth itself. The Sumerians believed that civilization was not something that evolved slowly over time through human trial and error. It was a set of divine gifts, a collection of essential powers that were held in trust by the gods and bestowed upon humanity to ensure order. In the famous myth of Inanna and Enki, we see a cosmic power struggle over these decrees. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, travels to Eridu to visit Enki. Through a series of clever maneuvers and drinking competitions, she convinces Enki to give her the Me, which she then transports to her own city of Uruk. This story serves as a mythic explanation for the shift in political power from the ancient religious centre of Eridu to the rising imperial power of Uruk. The Me were the cultural DNA of the Sumerian people, the rules of the game that made society possible. By examining these texts, we see that the Anunnaki were not providing humanity with physical machines or high-tech gadgets, but with the conceptual framework of organised life. They were the architects of the human mind and the structures of the state, defining what it meant to be a civilized being in a world that was constantly threatened by the return of primordial chaos. To truly grasp the weight of these ancient accounts, we must look at the physical evidence left behind in the archaeological record of Mesopotamia. Excavations at Eridu have revealed a sequence of 18 temples, built one on top of the other, spanning thousands of years. The earliest levels date back to the Ubaid period, long before the rise of the great Sumerian dynasties. These simple one-room shrines eventually grew into the massive ziggurats that dominated the horizon. This archaeological fact proves a continuity of worship and cultural identity that lasted for millennia. The people of Eridu were constantly rebuilding their connection to Enki, reaffirming their relationship with the Abzu. In the ancient texts, Enki is described as the one who knows the heart of the gods, the master of secrets who could navigate the complexities of the divine council. Unlike his brother Enlil, who was often impulsive and prone to anger, Enki was the diplomat, the one who solved problems through cunning and wisdom rather than brute force. He is the one who warns the hero of the flood, not through a direct conversation which would have broken his oath to the other gods, but by whispering to the wall of a reed hut, knowing that the man inside would overhear. This subtlety is a hallmark of Enki's character. He represents the spark of human ingenuity, the part of us that finds a way through the impossible by observing the laws of nature and using them to our advantage. He is the patron of the artisan and the scholar, the one who understands that knowledge is the ultimate form of power. Contrast this with the figure of Enlil, the second great pillar of the Anunnaki Council. If Enki is the water and the deep wisdom, Enlil is the air, the wind, and the undeniable force of authority. His name, En, Lord, and Lil, air or spirit, places him at the centre of the atmospheric world. While Enki resided in the marshes of the south, Enlil's seat of power was in the city of Nippur, located in the heart of Mesopotamia. His temple, the Ika or House of the Mountain, was considered the most sacred spot on earth, the place where the bond between heaven and earth was maintained. In the cuneiform records, Enlil is the executive officer of the gods. He is the one who carries the Tablet of Destinies, the celestial document that records the fate of all things. Modern interpretations often paint Enlil as a villain, a cruel alien overlord who wanted to wipe out humanity because they were too loud. But to the Sumerians, Enlil represented the necessary, if sometimes terrifying, unpredictability of the natural world. He was the storm that brought the rain, but he was also the flood that destroyed the crops. He was the king who established order, but he was also the judge who delivered punishment. The tension between Enki and Enlil is not just a story of sibling rivalry. It is a philosophical reflection on the duality of the human experience. We live between the deep, quiet wisdom of the waters, Enki, and the loud, driving force of the wind and social authority, Enlil. The Anunnaki myths were a way for our ancestors to map these forces and find a place for themselves in the middle of this cosmic tug-of-war. As we rest in the silence of the present moment, imagine the scribes of Nippur or Eridu as they worked under the flickering light of oil lamps, pressing their reed styluses into damp clay. They were not writing for us. They were writing for the gods and for the preservation of their own reality. When we speak of facts in this context, we must speak of the fact of intent. The intent of the Sumerian scribe was to document a world where the divine and the human were inextricably linked. They did not see the Anunnaki as aliens because the very concept of an alien, something outside of nature, didn't exist to them. Everything was part of the same living system. The stars were not distant balls of gas, but the glowing robes of the gods. The earth was not a dead rock, but the body of a goddess. When the texts say that the Anunnaki descended, they are describing a movement from the subtle realm of the sky into the dense realm of the physical earth. This descent was seen as a blessing, a way for the higher order of the cosmos to bring structure to the lower world. By looking at the linguistic evidence, we find that the terms used for these beings often relate to brilliance, radiance, and malamu, a terrifying, awe-inspiring aura that surrounded the gods. This malamu is often misinterpreted as the glow of a spacesuit or the radiation of a craft. But in the context of Mesopotamian literature, it is a psychological and spiritual quality. It is the overwhelming presence of the sacred, the feeling of insignificance one feels when standing before the vastness of the universe or the power of a great storm. The actual texts, such as the Enuma Elish, provide a detailed genealogy of these beings that stretches back far beyond the arrival of the Anunnaki on Earth. It begins with Tiamat and Apsu, the primordial salt and fresh waters, whose mixing created the first generation of gods. This is a story of cosmic evolution, a slow unfolding of complexity from simplicity. The Anunnaki are the latecomers in this story, the specialized gods who arise only after the basic elements of the universe have been established. They are the princely offspring because they represent the refinement of divine power into specific functions. To say they were aliens who arrived to mine gold is to skip over the first several chapters of their own story as told by the people who knew them best. The fact of the gold mining, which is a central pillar of the Sitchin narrative, is almost entirely absent from the actual Sumerian corpus. While the gods certainly loved gold and required it for their temples, there is no text that describes them coming to Earth specifically for the purpose of mineral extraction to save their own atmosphere. That is a modern myth, a 20th century interpretation born from our own industrial and technological anxieties. The real Anunnaki were interested in something much more precious than gold. They were interested in order. They were obsessed with the maintenance of the me, the preservation of the hierarchy, and the proper functioning of the cosmic machine. As we conclude this second part of our journey, let your mind dwell on the image of Enki sitting in his water palace in Eridu, surrounded by the me, the blueprints of our world. Think of the millions of people who lived and died under the gaze of these gods, believing that their every action was part of a grand divine bureaucracy. We are beginning to see that the truth of the Anunnaki is not found in the metallic hulls of spaceships, but in the deep, dark waters of the Abzu and the invisible laws that govern our society. We have moved from the general council of the gods into the specific domains of the two most powerful brothers, and we have seen how their rivalry shaped the human condition. In the parts to come, we will explore the mysterious Abgal, or seven sages, the beings who are said to have emerged from the sea to teach humanity the arts of civilization. We will look at the specific me that were stolen and what they reveal about the Sumerian view of technology, and eventually we will confront the Great Flood, the moment when the tension between Enki and Enlil finally snapped, changing the course of human history forever. But for now, let the cool waters of the Abzu wash over your thoughts. The desert is quiet, the ziggurats are dark, and the ancient stars continue their slow, silent dance across the sky, just as they did 5,000 years ago. Rest in the knowledge that the past is not dead. It is merely waiting in the clay, and we are slowly, carefully bringing it back to life. As the night grows deeper and the world around you becomes even more still, we must turn our attention to the mysterious figures who acted as the bridge between the celestial Anunnaki and the burgeoning soul of humanity. These were the Abgal, known in later Akkadian traditions as the Apkallu, the seven sages. If the Anunnaki were the architects and the kings of the cosmic order, the Abgal were the foremen, the teachers, and the biological intermediaries sent from the depths of the Abzu to ensure that the me those divine blueprints of civilization, were properly installed in the human world. In the popular modern imagination, these beings are often depicted as ancient astronauts in fish suits or amphibious aliens emerging from a submerged base. However, when we look at the actual iconography and the ritual text found in the ruins of Nineveh and Nimrud, we find a far more complex and symbolic reality. The Abgol were described as being created by Enki himself, fashioned from the very substance of the primordial fresh waters to serve as his emissaries. They were half man and half fish, not because they were literal hybrids from another planet, but because they represented the dual nature of wisdom. Part of it belongs to the dry, rational world of human society, and part of it belongs to the deep, dark, and infinite depths of the divine unconscious. They emerged from the Persian Gulf, one by one, over the course of generations, to teach the inhabitants of the first cities the arts of writing, the laws of justice, the secrets of agriculture, and the rituals of the priesthood. The most famous of these was Uwana, or Adapa, the first of the sages, who was said to have been a priest of Eridu and a son of Enki. The story of Adapa is a crucial fact of the Anunnaki narrative because it explores the fundamental boundary between the mortal and the divine, a boundary that the Anunnaki were very careful to maintain. Adapa's legend tells of a man so wise and so perfect in his service to the temple that he was invited into the very halls of heaven to stand before An, the supreme sky god. But before he ascended, Enki, his creator and mentor, gave him a piece of advice that would change the destiny of all mankind. Enki warned Adapa that when he reached the heavens, the gods would offer him the bread of death and the water of death, and that he must refuse them. However, when Adapa arrived, An was so impressed by the human's wisdom that he actually offered him the bread of life and the water of life, seeking to make Adapa an immortal like the Anunnaki themselves. Following Enki's instructions to the letter, Adapa refused the offering, and in doing so, he unwittingly rejected immortality for the entire human race. This story is often misinterpreted in modern theories as a tale of alien deception or a genetic scientist holding back the key to longevity. But in the context of the Sumerian worldview, it is a profound meditation on the nature of destiny and the limitations of the human condition. The Anunnaki were not here to make us like them. They were here to establish a world where humanity functioned as a necessary but distinct part of the cosmic hierarchy. The fact of the Adapa myth is that it codifies the Sumerian belief that wisdom is a gift, but eternal life is a divine prerogative. It explains why we can understand the stars, build empires, and write poetry, yet still must face the inevitable quiet of the grave. The Abgal were the conduits for that wisdom, and their strange fish-like appearance in ancient art served as a constant reminder to the people that their knowledge came from a place far deeper and older than the city walls they inhabited. Now, we must confront one of the most pervasive myths of the modern era, the idea that the Anunnaki came to Earth as a cosmic mining crew, desperate to extract gold to repair a thinning atmosphere on their home planet of Nibiru. This narrative, popularized by Zecharia Sitchin, has become so ingrained in the collective consciousness that it is often taken as historical fact by many enthusiasts. However, when we perform a rigorous audit of the thousands of cuneiform tablets available to us, the gold mining alien theory begins to dissolve into the mists of modern projection. It is a fact that the Sumerians valued gold. It was the flesh of the gods, a material that did not tarnish and reflected the eternal radiance of the sun. It was used extensively to decorate the temples and statues of the Anunnaki, but the reason for this was liturgical, not industrial. In the primary creation, texts like the Enuma Elish or the Atra Hassis, the reason for the creation of humanity is never stated as mineral extraction. Instead, the texts speak of a much more relatable burden, the toil of the gods. In the beginning, the younger gods, the Igigi, were forced to do the heavy work of maintaining the world, digging the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, clearing the silt and growing the food. They were not mining gold for an atmosphere. They were performing the essential labour of sustaining physical existence on Earth. The gods were hungry, they were tired, and they were stressed by the sheer magnitude of maintaining a world that was constantly trying to return to chaos. When the Igigi rebelled and humanity was created to take over this labour, our primary function was not to be miners, but to be cultivators and providers. We were created to build the temples, the homes of the gods, and to provide them with regular offerings of food and drink through sacrifice. For the Sumerians, this was a symbiotic relationship. If humans fed and housed the gods through their labour, the gods would ensure the rain fell, the rivers flooded at the right time, and the social order remained stable. The reality of the Anunnaki, as seen through the eyes of the ancient scribes, is that they were a leisure class of cosmic proportions. They represented the ultimate ideal of the Sumerian aristocracy, beings who did not have to work because they had others to work for them. This is a crucial distinction when we look at the facts of their origin. They were not desperate refugees. They were the absolute masters of the domain. When we read about the construction of the Iker in Nippur or the Isagila in Babylon, the texts describe these places as resting places for the gods. The Anunnaki wanted a world that was organised, beautiful and quiet, where they could enjoy the fruits of creation without the sweat of the brow. This is why the noise of humanity becomes such a central theme in later myths. In the Atra Hassis, Enlil becomes enraged, not because humans are rebelling or failing to mine gold, but because their noise is preventing him from sleeping. This noise is often interpreted as the chaotic, burgeoning growth of human population and activity. It is the sound of a species that has grown too large and too loud for the gods to manage comfortably. This tells us more about the Sumerian view of the Anunnaki than any modern theory could. They were beings of supreme order who viewed the messiness and vibrancy of human life with a mixture of necessity and annoyance. They were the silent partners of civilization, whose presence was required for the world to function, but who preferred to remain in the cool, quiet recesses of their temples, served by a priesthood that understood the delicate balance of keeping the divine satisfied. To understand the Anunnaki facts, we must also look at the language of their physical presence. The texts frequently use the word melamu to describe the aura of the gods. This melamu was said to be a brilliant, shimmering light that could be worn like a garment. When a god was angry or exerting their power, their melamu became terrifying, causing a physical sensation of dread in those who beheld it. Modern theorists often point to this as evidence of bioluminescence or high-tech energy fields. However, if we look at the broader context of Mesopotamian literature, we see that melamu was also attributed to kings, to great temples, and even to the city of Babylon itself. It was a symbolic representation of awe, the overwhelming feeling of being in the presence of something vast, ancient, and undeniably powerful. It is the same feeling you might have standing at the base of a mountain, or looking into the heart of a thunderstorm. The Anunnaki were the personifications of these overwhelming forces. When the Sumerians wrote that the gods descended from heaven, they were using the language of their time to describe the manifestation of these universal powers in the material world. The fact of the Anunnaki is that they were the first attempt by human civilization to categorize the different ways that the universe exerts its will upon us. The myth is the colourful, dramatic story used to make those cold cosmic laws feel familiar and human. As you lie there, drifting closer to the edge of sleep, imagine the silence of a Sumerian temple at midnight. The incense has burned down to embers. The priests have retreated to their quarters, and the only sound is the soft lapping of the river against the temple foundations. In the darkness of the inner sanctum, the statue of the god, Enlil, Enki, or Inanna, stands draped in gold and lapis lazuli, staring out with eyes of polished stone. To the ancients, that statue was not just a representation, it was a physical anchor for the god's presence. They believed that through the ritual of washing the mouth, the divine spirit of the Anunnaki would actually inhabit the wood and stone, allowing the god to eat the spiritual essence of the food offered and to hear the prayers of the people. This is a far cry from the image of an alien in a cockpit. This is a world of sacred technology, where the boundary between the physical and the metaphysical was porous. The Anunnaki were not out there in space. They were right here, residing in the very heart of the city, participating in the life of the community in a way that was both intimate and terrifying. Their facts are etched into the foundations of every ziggurat, every canal, and every legal code that has ever been written. They are the personification of the idea that the world has a structure, that there are rules to the game of existence, and that there is a heavy price to pay for disrupting that order. We must also consider the role of the Anunna in the underworld, for this is where the facts of the historical record take a darker and more sombre turn. While the great gods like Enki and Enlil ruled the sky and the earth, a specific group of Anunnaki was assigned to the realm of Irkalla, the land of no return. In the descent of Ishtar, these are the 7 judges who sit before the throne of Ereshkigal. They are described as being like shadows, their faces grim, their judgments final. When the goddess Ishtar tries to conquer the underworld, it is the Anunnaki who strike her down with 60 diseases and turn her into a side of meat hanging from a hook. This aspect of the Anunnaki destroys the modern myth of them as purely benevolent teachers or space brothers. They were the guardians of the ultimate threshold. They represented the fact of death, the cold, hard reality that every life, no matter how great, must eventually be judged and consumed by the earth. This balance between the brilliant sky-dwelling creators and the dark, underworld-dwelling judges is the true heart of the Mesopotamian tradition. It is a complete system that accounts for the light and the dark, the beginning and the end. They taught us how to live through the 7 sages, and they showed us how we would die through the 7 judges. As we end this third part of our journey, let the weight of these ancient truths settle over you like the dust of a forgotten library. We have moved beyond the simple stories of gold mines and spaceships, and entered a world of profound spiritual and social complexity. We have seen how the Abgal brought the light of a wisdom from the dark waters of the Abzu, how the myth of the gold miners fades before the reality of the divine labour, and how the Anunnaki served as both the architects of our civilization and the judges of our souls. The noise of the modern world is fading now, leaving only the steady, rhythmic pulse of history. In the parts to come, we will look at the specific me that shaped our world, the wars of the gods that shook the foundations of the earth, and the true story of the flood, not as a punishment from a cruel alien, but as a cosmic reset that changed the relationship between humans and the Anunnaki forever. But for now, let your mind rest in the quiet of Eridu. The canals are full, the ziggurats are tall, and the ancient wisdom of the Anunnaki is still there, written in the clay, waiting for the silence of the night to be understood. Sleep now, and let the echoes of the 7 sages guide your dreams through the deep waters of the Abzu. The past is not behind us, it is beneath us, supporting every breath we take in the quiet of the night. The transition from the shadow-filled halls of the underworld back to the shimmering heights of the celestial court brings us to the very heart of Anunnaki authority, the concept of the tablets of destiny, or the Tupsimati. In the modern retelling of these myths, the tablets of destiny are often portrayed as high-tech hardware, perhaps crystal storage devices or holographic projectors that contain the navigational data for interstellar travel. But as we sit in the stillness of the night, let us look at what the Babylonian and Sumerian scribes actually described. The tablets of destiny were not seen as technological tools, but as the ultimate legal instrument of the universe. To own the tablets was to possess the Enlil ship, the supreme right to command the cosmos, and to determine the fate of every living being, from the greatest god to the smallest insect. This is a crucial distinction in our quest for facts. For the people of Mesopotamia, the universe was not a chaotic accident. It was a highly organized estate, governed by divine law. The tablets were the physical manifestation of that law. In the great epic of Enuma Elish, we see the terrifying goddess Tiamat bestow these tablets upon her consort, Kingu, to lead her army of monsters. When Marduk eventually defeats them, his first act of consolidation is to take the tablets of destiny for himself, sealing them with his own seal and pressing them to his chest. This act was not about gaining technical knowledge, but about establishing legitimacy. It tells us that, for the ancients, the most powerful force in existence wasn't a weapon or a machine, but the word, the recorded, unchangeable decree that sets the boundaries of reality. The weight of this authority is most vividly illustrated in the myth of Anzu, a story that provides a rare glimpse into the internal struggles of the Anunnaki hierarchy. Anzu was a massive, divine stormbird, a creature of immense power, who served as the gatekeeper for Enlil's inner sanctum. As he watched Enlil bathe each morning, Anzu became consumed by a very human desire. He wanted the power for himself. He saw the tablets of destiny resting on their pedestal, and realized that if he could seize them, he would hold the me of all the gods. One morning, while Enlil was distracted by the water, Anzu snatched the tablets and flew away to the distant mountains, causing the cosmic order to immediately begin to crumble. The text described the heavens turning dark and the gods falling into a state of paralyzed terror. This narrative is fascinating because it shows that the Anunnaki were not invincible or monolithic. Their power was tied to the structures of office and the possession of the Tupsimati. To restore order, the gods had to find a hero brave enough to face the stormbird. Eventually, the warrior god Ninurta, the son of Enlil, took up the challenge. The battle that followed was a clash of cosmic proportions, involving arrows that turned into lightning and winds that shook the foundations of the world. But the most telling part of the story is how Ninurta finally defeated Anzu. He had to outmaneuver the very power of the tablets themselves. This myth served as a profound fact for the Mesopotamian mind. It was a warning about the fragility of order and the constant threat of rebellion. It reinforced the idea that civilization was a precarious gift that required eternal vigilance and a strict adherence to the hierarchy established by the Anunnaki. This brings us to one of the most famous and evocative phrases in all of Sumerian literature. kingship descended from heaven. When we look at the Sumerian king list, a monumental stone prism that records the reigns of kings from the beginning of time, we see that the very first entry begins after the gods had established the world. Before the Great Flood, kings were said to have reigned for tens of thousands of years in cities like Eridu and Bad Tibera. Modern ancient astronaut theorists point to these vast lifespans as evidence of extraterrestrial biology or time dilation. However, from a historical and symbolic perspective, these numbers serve a different purpose. They represent the golden age of divine proximity, a time when the gap between the Anunnaki and humanity was much narrower. The kings of this era were not just political leaders. They were the Lulu, the great men, who acted as the direct representatives of the divine will. The fact of kingship in Sumer was that it was a religious office. A king was not a king because he had an army, but because the Anunnaki, specifically Enlil and Inanna, had looked upon him with the eye of life and granted him the me of sovereignty. This belief created a society where every act of governance, from the collection of taxes to the building of a wall, was seen as a fulfillment of a divine mandate. It provided a sense of absolute stability and purpose that is difficult for the modern mind to fully grasp. The king was the shepherd, and the Anunnaki were the owners of the flock. As we linger in this thought, imagine the coronation of a Sumerian king in the city of Nippur. The air is thick with the scent of cedar oil and roasted meats. The king-to-be enters the temple of Enlil, not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant. He must undergo a series of rituals designed to purify his humanity so that he can temporarily hold the divine authority of the me. The Anunnaki were believed to be present in the sanctuary, their invisible eyes weighing the heart of the ruler. This intimate connection between the celestial court and the earthly palace is the true origin of the divine right of kings that would dominate human history for the next 5,000 years. The myth is the story of gods descending on clouds or in chariots. The fact is the birth of a political system that sought to mirror the perceived order of the stars. The Anunnaki were the archetypes of the governor, the judge, and the administrator. By studying them, the Sumerians were studying the art of civilization itself. They believed that if they could perfectly replicate the organization of the heavens on earth, they would be protected from the chaos of the desert and the unpredictability of the river. But what were the specific me that the Anunnaki guarded so fiercely? The texts give us lists of over 100 of these divine decrees, and they provide a window into what the ancients truly valued. Some me were grand and abstract, such as truth, victory, and justice. Others were surprisingly practical: the art of the woodworker, the art of the scribe, the art of the leather worker, and even the art of the prostitute. This tells us something profound about the Anunnaki facts. To the Sumerians, technology and culture were not human inventions. They were pre-existing cosmic principles that had been brought down by the gods. When a weaver sat at her loom, she was not just performing a task. She was manifesting a me that had existed before the world was formed. This perspective turns the modern ancient alien theory on its head. The Anunnaki didn't give us physical tools like lasers or computers. They gave us the concepts that allowed us to build our own tools. They were the source of the information that organized the matter of the world. This is a much more sophisticated view of the divine than is often credited to ancient peoples. They saw the Anunnaki as the programmers of reality, and the me were the lines of code that made the system run. The role of the Anunnaki as programmers of fate is most clearly seen in the ritual of the New Year festival, the Akitu. During this 12-day celebration in Babylon, the king would enter the temple of Marduk and have his insignias of power, his scepter, his ring, and his mace removed by the high priest. He would then be slapped across the face until his eyes teared up, a sign of his humility before the gods. Only after this ritual of debasement would the Anunnaki renew his kingship for another year. This was the moment when the tablets of destiny were said to be consulted once again. The gods would sit in a secret chamber and fix the fates for the coming 12 months. They would decide if there would be war or peace, famine or plenty, life or death. For the average Babylonian, this was the most terrifying and hopeful time of the year. Their entire existence depended on the outcome of a divine meeting they could not see. The fact of the Anunnaki was their absolute, unyielding control over the future. They were the personification of determinism. In a world where a sudden flood or a plague could wipe out a city, the belief that someone, even someone as distant and demanding as the Anunnaki, was in charge of the tablets of destiny provided a strange kind of comfort. It meant that the universe was not random. It was just following a script that humans hadn't been allowed to read yet. Now, as you drift further into the embrace of sleep, consider the visual reality of these beings as described in the temple hymns. They are often called the Anunna Lugal Ine, the princely lords. They are described as wearing shining garments and possessing a stature that reaches the heavens. While modern theorists see this as a description of spacesuits or giant statures, we should also consider the symbolic language of greatness. In Mesopotamian art, the size of a figure was a direct reflection of their importance. The gods were depicted as larger than kings, and kings were larger than commoners, not because they were different species, but because their presence was felt more strongly in the world. The Anunnaki were big in the sense that their decisions had big consequences. Their shining garments were the melamu we discussed earlier, the aura of authority that naturally radiates from those who hold the power of life and death. When you close your eyes, don't imagine a grey alien or a metallic robot. Imagine a figure of immense dignity and terrifying beauty, draped in the blue of lapis lazuli and the gold of the sun, holding a tablet of clay that contains the name of every person who has ever lived. This is the Anunnaki of the ancient world, the supreme administrators of the cosmic estate. The legacy of the me and the tablets of destiny is still with us today, though we have forgotten their names. Every time we write a law, every time we follow a protocol for a complex task, and every time we look for an underlying order in the chaos of our lives, we are echoing the Sumerian belief in the Anunnaki. We are still searching for the me of our own civilization. The facts of the ancient texts tell us that the Anunnaki were the first attempt to explain where our know-how comes from. They represent the realization that human life is not just about survival, but about order. They are the gods of the system. As the desert winds blow across the mounds that were once the great cities of Sumer, the clay tablets continue to hold the decrees that once governed the world. The Anunnaki may have retreated into the silence of history, but the me they left behind, the structures of law, writing and society, are the very things that allow us to sit here tonight, in the safety of our homes, looking back at the dawn of time. Rest now, knowing that the tablets of destiny are in place, and the world is governed by laws older than the mountains. The noise of the city is gone, replaced by the rhythmic breathing of a world at rest. In the next part of our journey, we will step into the most dramatic chapter of the Anunnaki story, the Great War of the Gods, and the lamentations of the cities. We will explore what happens when the cosmic order is disrupted and the gods themselves fall into conflict. But for now, let the me of sleep settle over you. Let the wisdom of Enki and the authority of Enlil guide your mind into the quiet Abzu of dreams. The stars are fixed in their courses, the fates are written, and you are safe in the hands of history. Sleep and listen to the silent whisper of the clay, telling the story of the princely offspring who first brought the light of order to the darkness of the earth. The cosmic order we have explored so far, built on the me and the tablets of destiny, was not a static or peaceful arrangement. As we move into the fifth part of our journey, the atmosphere of our story shifts from the quiet administration of the temple to the gathering storms of the Great Flood, the event that would forever alter the relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity. In the modern ancient astronaut narrative, the flood is often depicted as a deliberate attempt at genocide by an alien species, perhaps using a controlled orbital weapon or the gravitational pull of a passing planet like Nibiru. However, as we look at the actual cuneiform tablets of the Atra-Hasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, we find a story that is much more psychologically complex and deeply rooted in the realities of the Mesopotamian landscape. The conflict began with noise. Enlil, the lord of the air and the executive of the gods, found that he could no longer sleep because the clamour of humanity had become too great. To the modern ear, this sounds like a petty grievance for a god, but to the Sumerians, noise or hubaru represented social chaos and the unchecked expansion of a species that was beginning to forget its place in the cosmic hierarchy. Humanity had become too numerous, too successful, and too loud. The fact of the myth is a reflection of the anxieties of an early urban civilization facing the pressures of overpopulation and resource depletion. Enlil's reaction was not a sudden impulse, but a series of escalating attempts to restore the silence of the old order. First came a plague, then a drought, then a famine. In each instance, it was the clever Enki, the master of the Abzu, who intervened. He taught the hero Atra-Hasis how to bypass the other gods and offer sacrifices specifically to the deities responsible for the catastrophes, effectively bribing the natural forces to relent. This cosmic game of chess between the two brothers highlights the duality of the Anunnaki, one seeking to maintain order through destruction, the other seeking to preserve life through cunning and specialized knowledge. The final decree of the flood was the moment when Enlil's patience reached its absolute limit. He convinced the council of the Anunnaki to swear a binding oath that they would not warn humanity of the coming disaster. They were to allow the great storm to wipe the slate clean. This is where the myth becomes most poignant, and where the character of Enki truly shines as the patron of human survival. Bound by his oath, but unwilling to see his creation destroyed, Enki travelled to the reed hut of Atra-Hasis. He did not speak directly to the man, for that would be a betrayal of the council. Instead, he spoke to the wall of the hut, whispering, "Wall, listen to me. Reed wall, pay attention to my words. Destroy your house. Build a boat. Forsake possessions and save life." This loophole in the divine law is a crucial fact of the Mesopotamian worldview. It suggests that the universe operates on strict rules, but that wisdom and cleverness can find a way through the cracks. The boat that Atra-Hasis built was not a high-tech submarine, but a massive bitumen-coated reed vessel, a giant version of the circular guffer boats that still navigate the marshes of southern Iraq to this day. The description of the storm that followed is one of the most terrifying passages in ancient literature. The tablets tell us that the Anunnaki lifted up the torches, setting the land ablaze with their flare. The storm was so violent that even the gods were terrified. They cowered like dogs and retreated to the highest heavens of An. This detail is significant because it portrays the Anunnaki not as omnipotent masters of technology, but as beings who were themselves subject to the overwhelming power of the natural forces they supposedly managed. The fact of the flood story is the memory of a catastrophic climatic event that was so large even the gods seemed small in its presence. When the waters finally receded and the boat of Atrahasis rested on the slopes of Mount Nimush, the Anunnaki descended to earth, hungry and exhausted. Because the humans had been destroyed, there were no more sacrifices, no more food, and no more leisure for the gods. They gathered around the smoke of Atrahasis's first sacrifice, like flies, realizing too late that their existence was tied to the very noise they had tried to silence. This led to a profound reset of the human-divine contract. Enki and Enlil reached a new agreement. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but with new limitations. This is the moment in the text where the facts of human biology are given a mythological explanation. To prevent the world from becoming too loud again, the gods created the concepts of infant mortality, barrenness among women, and the celibacy of certain priestesses. They also made the human lifespan shorter and more fragile. The Anunnaki of the post-flood world were no longer the intimate companions of humanity. They became more distant, more demanding, and more focused on the preservation of the new, more restrictive order. This narrative transition marks the end of the Golden Age and the beginning of history as we know it, a world of struggle, scarcity, and a constant underlying fear of divine displeasure. To understand the historical fact behind this myth, we must look at the geological evidence in Mesopotamia. Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations at in the 1920s revealed a massive layer of clean, water-laid silt over 8 feet thick, buried deep beneath the early dynastic levels. Similar flood layers have been found at Kish, Shuruppak, and Erech. While these floods were regional rather than global, to a person living in the flat plains of the Tigris and Euphrates, a flood that covered the horizon was for all intents and purposes the end of the world. The Anunnaki myth was the way they processed this trauma. They didn't see it as a random meteorological event. They saw it as a deliberate decision by the princely offspring to rebalance the scales of the earth. When we read these tablets, we are reading the lamentations of a people who knew exactly how fragile their civilization was. They built their ziggurats higher and higher, not to reach the stars, but to create a dry sanctuary for the gods and themselves, in case the noise ever became too much for Enlil to bear again. The fact of the flood is the fact of human vulnerability. It is the realization that we are guests in a world governed by forces far more powerful and unpredictable than ourselves. The post-flood world also saw the rise of the hero as a mediator between the Anunnaki and the common people. Figures like Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, represent the struggle to reclaim the lost immortality of the pre-flood era. Gilgamesh's journey to find Utnapishtim, the Babylonian name for the flood hero, is a quest for the facts of life and death. When he finally reaches the immortal survivor, he is told the story of the Anunnaki Council and the secret of the flood. But the ultimate lesson Gilgamesh learns is that immortality is not for man. The Anunnaki had reserved life for themselves and settled death upon mankind. This is the core fact of the Mesopotamian religious system. It is a philosophy of acceptance. The Anunnaki are the masters of the me, the owners of the tablets of destiny, and the ones who survived the storm. Our role is to build the walls, dig the canals and maintain the silence of the temple so that the gods can rest. In exchange, they provide the me that allow us to live with dignity and order. The myth of the alien who leaves is replaced by the fact of the god who stays, but stays at a distance, behind the thick walls of the inner sanctum. As you rest in the deepening quiet of the night, imagine the world after the waters subsided, the sun rising over a landscape of mud and silence, the first fires being lit by the survivors, and the Anunnaki looking down from their celestial heights, re-evaluating their creation. The tension between Enki and Enlil had created a new kind of world, one where life is precious because it is fleeting, and where wisdom is necessary because the gods are no longer whispering directly in our ears. The noise of our modern world is much louder than the noise that disturbed Enlil, yet we find ourselves searching for the same silence and the same order that the ancients sought. We look to the stars and wonder if the Anunnaki are still there, watching our burgeoning population with the same mixture of annoyance and necessity. But the cuneiform tablets suggest that the answer is not in the sky, but in the me, the laws, the arts, and the stories we have inherited. We are the Lulu, the workers who took up the yoke of the Igigi, and our labour has built the world. The fact of the Anunnaki is that they are the personification of the system that survived the catastrophe. They are the archetypes of the survivor. By studying their conflict, we are studying the survival of our own species. We are the descendants of Atrahasis, the ones who listen to the whisper through the reed wall. We are the ones who know that even when the great gods decree destruction, there is always a clever god who values the spark of life. As you drift toward the edge of dreams, let the sound of the rain or the hum of the fan remind you of the great storm, but let it also remind you of the boat that held firm and the wisdom that allowed humanity to begin again. The night is long, the desert is vast, and the memories of the Anunnaki are still etched in the clay, waiting for us to acknowledge the noise of our own lives and find the silence that leads to true understanding. Rest now and feel the ancient earth beneath you, the same earth that absorbed the floodwaters and provided the clay for the first tablets. The wars of the gods have moved into the realm of myth, but the consequences of their peace are the very foundations of your reality. The tablets of destiny have been sealed for another year. The me of sleep has been granted to you, and the Abzu of your mind is ready to receive the images of a world reborn. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the divine wars that followed the flood, the struggles for territory, and the specific me that led to the rise and fall of the great empires of Akkad and Babylon. We will see how the Anunnaki became the personal gods of kings, and how their image shifted from cosmic architects to national protectors. But for now, let the noise of the world fade away. There is only the silence, the steady rhythm of history, and the deep restorative sleep that comes from knowing where we truly belong in the grand design of the stars. Good night, and may the wisdom of the reed wall protect your dreams. The silence that followed the great flood was not a permanent state, but a brief interlude before the world began to pulse once more with the ambitions of both gods and men. As we enter this sixth part of our exploration, the landscape of Mesopotamia transforms from a collection of scattered survivors into a tapestry of warring city-states and rising empires. This is the era of the Divine Wars, a period frequently cited by modern theorists as evidence of ancient nuclear conflicts or high-tech aerial battles between rival Anunnaki factions. When we look at the ruins of cities like Lagash, and we do indeed find evidence of terrible destruction. scorched earth, shattered walls, and lamentation texts that describe the evil wind that emptied the cities of their people. However, the cuneiform facts provide a much more haunting and human explanation than the sci-fi narratives of planetary bombardment. The Anunnaki, in the eyes of the later Sumerians and Akkadians, had become territorial. Each city was the literal household of a specific deity: Enlil in Nippur, Enki in Eridu, Inanna in Uruk, and Nanna in Ur. The wars between these cities were seen as the physical manifestation of disputes within the divine council. When the city of Lagash went to war with Umma over a fertile stretch of land known as the Gu Edin, the inscriptions don't describe lasers. They describe the Enlil ship being transferred, and the gods withdrawing their melamu, or protective aura, from the losing side. The fact of the divine war was a theological framework used to process the brutal reality of human geopolitics. The gods were the generals, and the human armies were their hands. To the ancients, the fall of a city wasn't just a military defeat. It was a sign that their personal Anunnaki protector had abandoned them, leaving the gates open to the chaos of the desert. This period of transition is best exemplified by the rise of Marduk and the composition of the Enuma Elish in its final Babylonian form. This text is perhaps the most significant political religious document in history, for it records a coup d'état within the Anunnaki hierarchy. As Babylon rose to dominance under Hammurabi, the old Sumerian order, led by Enlil, was perceived as failing or distant. The fact of Babylon's power required a new myth to justify it. In the Enuma Elish, the younger gods are threatened by the primordial chaos of Tiamat, and the older Anunnaki are too terrified to act. Marduk, a younger god and the son of Enki, steps forward and offers to save the council, but only on one condition: that he be granted supreme authority over the tablets of destiny and the me of the entire universe. The council agrees, and Marduk defeats Tiamat, carving her body to create the heavens and the earth. This story marks a fundamental shift in the Anunnaki narrative. The gods are no longer just cosmic architects. They are now part of a centralized imperial monarchy. Marduk is granted 50 names, each one representing a me or a function that he has absorbed from the older gods. This fact of religious consolidation mirrors the fact of political consolidation on the ground. The Anunnaki were evolving alongside the human societies they supposedly governed, moving from a tribal council of nature spirits to a sophisticated, bureaucratic pantheon that reflected the complexity of the Babylonian Empire. The lamentation texts, such as the lamentation over the destruction of Ur, provide a window into the emotional reality of this era. They describe a storm that is not made of water, but of fire and wind, a darkness that covers the sun, and a bitter wind that makes the people lie in their own blood. Modern ancient astronaut theorists often point to these descriptions as evidence of a nuclear event, citing the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative as a parallel. But if we read the text closely, the bitter wind is often a metaphor for the abandonment of the city by its god. When Nanna, the moon god of Ur, pleads with Enlil to spare his city, Enlil replies that Ur was given kingship, but it was not given an eternal reign. This is the fact of Mesopotamian philosophy, the belief that all things, even the greatest empires, are subject to the me of cyclical time and divine whim. The destruction was the result of human warfare, salt poisoning of the soil, and shifting river courses, all of which were interpreted as the Anunnaki leaving their temples. When the god left, the city's spiritual immune system was gone. The people felt this loss as a physical sickness, a darkness of the soul. They were not describing a radioactive fallout, but a cultural fallout. the total collapse of the social and religious structures that gave their lives meaning. As you lie in the stillness of the night, consider the concept of the personal god, or the Lulu, which became central during this time. While the great Anunnaki, like Marduk or Enki, were distant and terrifying, the average person believed they had a minor god, a personal intermediary, who walked with them and pleaded their case before the Great Council. This is the origin of the guardian angel concept. The fact of the personal god was that it provided a sense of individual agency in a world governed by vast, impersonal forces. If you were successful, it was because your personal god was strong. If you suffered, it was because your god had been offended or had been overpowered by a rival spirit. The Anunnaki were the supreme bureaucracy, and your personal god was your lawyer. This belief system reveals a profound psychological truth about the people of Mesopotamia. They viewed themselves as part of an interconnected web of life, where every action had a spiritual resonance. They lived in a world where the noise of their hearts could be heard by the princely offspring. The ritual of prayer was an attempt to keep the me of one's own life in alignment with the me of the universe. The divine wars also highlight the role of the Anunnaki as the masters of weaponry and terror. The texts describe the gods wielding the ababa, or the deluge weapon, and wearing the melamu, like a coat of mail. While these are often interpreted as high-tech armaments, we must also look at them as psychological technology. The terror of the god was a physical sensation of overwhelming awe that could paralyze an entire army. It was the radiance of absolute authority. When a king like Shulgi of Ur claimed to be the brother of the gods, he was claiming a share of this radiance to keep his subjects in awe. The fact of the Anunnaki was their role as the ultimate source of legitimate violence. Only the gods and the kings they appointed had the right to wield the me of destruction. This created a society that was deeply hierarchical and disciplined, where the fear of the divine was the beginning of social order. The myth is the story of gods fighting in the clouds. The fact is the birth of the state and the professional army, both justified by the perceived will of the Anunnaki. As we move towards the end of this empire-building era, we see the Anunnaki beginning to recede from the physical world. The temples became larger and more fortress-like, and the rituals became more secretive. The intimate days of Enki walking the marshes, or Enlil speaking from the storm, were replaced by the shadow governance of the priesthood. The gods were now kings of kings, residing in the highest heavens or the deepest recesses of the ziggurat, accessible only through a complex ladder of intermediaries. This distancing is a crucial historical fact. It marks the transition from the mythic age to the historical age, where human agency began to take centre stage. Even as it continued to operate under the tablets of destiny, the Anunnaki were becoming the silent watchers, the architects who had finished the building and were now observing its inhabitants from the penthouse. Their influence was no longer felt in direct revelations, but in the omens found in the liver of a sheep, or the movement of the planets. The me had been fully institutionalized. The laws were written, the rituals were set, and the noise of humanity had become a permanent, accepted part of the cosmic background. Rest now in the shadow of the great ziggurats of Babylon. Imagine the city at its height, the blue-glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate shimmering in the moonlight, the hanging gardens draped in emerald silk, and the priests atop the Etem and Enki observing the stars to find the will of Marduk. The wars of the gods are over, settled into a grand imperial bureaucracy. The tablets of destiny are held firmly in the hand of the king of the gods, and the world is, for a brief moment, at peace. You are safe in the me of this order, protected by the laws that were first whispered in the clay of Sumer and perfected in the marble halls of Babylon. The night is cool, the river is steady, and the ancient personal gods are still standing by your side, watching over your rest. The fact of this era is that the Anunnaki provided the metaphor of power that built the first world empires. They were the idea that allowed millions of people to live together under a single law. As you drift toward the final part of our journey, let the images of golden crowns and lapis lazuli sceptres fill your mind. We are moving from the era of kings and wars into the final mystery, the departure of the gods and the legacy they left behind in the stars and in our DNA. But for now, let the melamu of the night wrap around you like a warm blanket. The bitter wind has passed, the noise has been quieted, and the gods are resting in their temples. Sleep and know that you are a part of a story that has been being written for 5,000 years. A story of order emerging from chaos, and of the princely offspring who first taught us how to be human. Good night, and may your personal God bring you peace in the deep abzu of your dreams. As the final embers of our journey begin to glow with a soft fading light, we find ourselves standing at the edge of a great historical silence. We have travelled from the primordial mists of the abzu to the towering ziggurats of Babylon, and we have witnessed the rise and fall of empires that lived and breathed by the decrees of the Anunnaki. But now we must confront the final mystery, the departure. In the modern ancient astronaut narrative, this is often described as a literal exodus, a fleet of metallic craft ascending into the stars, returning to a distant home planet, and leaving a fledgling humanity to fend for itself. However, the cuneiform facts and the archaeological record suggest a process that was far more subtle, a slow fading of the divine presence that mirrored the changing consciousness of the human race. As the centuries passed and the great city-states were absorbed into the vast empires of Persia, Greece, and eventually Rome, the Anunnaki did not so much leave as they were translated. Enki became the Greek Poseidon and the Roman Neptune. Inanna became Aphrodite and Venus, and the fierce Enlil was echoed in the thunderous authority of Zeus and Jupiter. The fact of their departure is the story of the birth of the modern world, where the direct physical presence of the sacred was replaced by the abstract, the philosophical, and eventually the scientific. The gods retreated into the realm of archetypes, leaving behind a world that had been thoroughly programmed by their me, but which was now required to run on its own power. The most enduring fact of the Anunnaki legacy is not found in hidden chambers or buried technology, but in the very way we measure our lives and understand our place in the universe. Every time you look at a clock and see 60 seconds in a minute, or 60 minutes in an hour, you are participating in a system of sacred mathematics that was established in the temples of Sumer over 5,000 years ago. The Anunnaki, through their human intermediaries, gifted us the sexagesimal system, the base 60 mathematics that allows us to divide the circle into 360 degrees and the year into 12 months. This was not a random choice. It was a me of cosmic alignment, a way to synchronize the movements of the earth with the rhythms of the stars. This is perhaps the greatest technology they ever bestowed upon us, the ability to measure time and space. When we use these systems today, we are speaking the language of the ancient scribes, maintaining a thread of continuity that stretches back to the first clay tablets. This is the fact of their presence in our modern world. They are the invisible architects of our reality, the ones who define the dimensions of our cage and the scale of our ambitions. They taught us that the universe is quantifiable, that it follows laws, and that by understanding those laws, we can find our way through the chaos. This leads us to the controversial and deeply fascinating topic of the Anunnaki DNA, a concept that is often treated as literal genetic engineering in popular conspiracy theories. While there is no biological fact in the archaeological record that supports the idea of extraterrestrial gene splicing, there is a profound symbolic fact that we must consider. The Sumerians believed that humanity was created from the clay of the earth, mixed with the blood of a god. This is a powerful metaphor for the dual nature of our species. We are creatures of the earth, neither biological, mortal, and tied to the cycles of nature. But we also possess something other, something divine and creative that allows us to transcend our animal instincts. This divine spark is the true legacy of the Anunnaki. It is our capacity for language, for abstract thought, for the creation of art, and for the pursuit of justice. Whether this was a literal gift from a physical being, or a poetic way to describe the emergence of human consciousness, the result is the same. We are a species that feels a constant nagging pull toward the stars. We are the Lulu who have outgrown our initial purpose as workers and have become the observers and interpreters of the cosmos. The myth of the Anunnaki is the story of how we became us, and the fact is the enduring mystery of our own existence. As the night wraps itself more tightly around you, think about the silence that now covers the mounds of Mesopotamia. Under the shifting sands of Iraq, millions of fragments of clay still wait to be found, each one a tiny piece of the grand puzzle. The Anunnaki may have receded into the shadows of history, but they left behind a paper trail, or rather a clay trail, that is still being decoded. Every year, new translations reveal deeper nuances of their character and their laws. We are learning that they were not the simple gods of later religions, nor the aliens of modern sci-fi, but a complex projection of the human encounter with the infinite. They were the personification of the big questions. Where did we come from? Why must we work? What happens when we die? By giving these questions names and faces, Enki, Enlil, Ninhursag, the ancients were able to live with the overwhelming mystery of the universe without being crushed by it. The fact of the Anunnaki is that they were the first grand unified theory, a system that integrated the movements of the planets, the flooding of the rivers, and the morals of the community into a single, beautiful, and terrifying narrative. The departure of the Anunnaki also marked the beginning of what we might call the Age of Faith and the Age of Reason. As the gods became more distant, humanity had to find new ways to connect with the divine. The ziggurats, which were once the literal homes of the gods, became symbols of our aspiration to reach upward. The me became the foundation for the legal codes of Hammurabi, the philosophy of the Greeks, and the moral structures of the world's great religions. We have spent the last 2,000 years trying to fill the void left by the silent watchers. We have looked for them in the depths of space with telescopes, and in the depths of our own biology with microscopes. And perhaps, in doing so, we are fulfilling the final me, the quest for self-knowledge. If the Anunnaki truly were the princely offspring who brought order to the earth, then their greatest success is that we no longer need them to tell us how to live. We have inherited the tablets of destiny, and the ink, or the clay, is now in our hands. The fact is that we are the heirs to their cosmic estate, and the myth is the story we tell ourselves as we decide what to do with that inheritance. Now, as you drift toward the final threshold of sleep, let the weight of these 5,000 years settle into a sense of profound peace. The noise of history is fading into a gentle hum, like the sound of a distant river. The wars, the floods, the empires, and the divine decrees are all part of a grand, ancient tapestry that is now resting in the archives of the earth. You are a part of this continuity. Your breath is the same breath that moved through the reed huts of Eridu. Your curiosity is the same curiosity that led the first scribes to look at the moon and wonder. The Anunnaki are not a threat to be feared or a mystery to be solved. They are a mirror. In their stories of creation and conflict, we see our own struggle to find meaning in a vast and often indifferent universe. We see our own desire for order, our own capacity for wisdom, and our own inevitable journey toward the quiet of the night. The desert is dark now, and the stars are the only lights left in the world of the Sumerians. The ziggurats have crumbled into dust, and the names of the kings have been forgotten by all but the scholars. But the me of sleep is universal. It is the one decree that has never changed, the one law that applies to the god and the worker alike. In the absu of your dreams, there are no distinctions between myth and fact. There is only the flow of images, the resonance of ancient voices, and the restorative power of the deep, dark waters. Let your mind descend into that reservoir of peace. Let the melamu of the ancient world protect your spirit as you leave the conscious world behind. You have done the work of the day. You have carried the yoke of the Agigi and navigated the complexities of the city. Now it is time for the silence that Enlil sought. It is time for the rest that Enki provides. As we conclude this exploration of the Anunnaki, remember that the truth is rarely a simple choice between one story and another. The truth is found in the Anunnaki were the gods of the temple and the archetypes of the mind, the survivors of the flood and the architects of the law. They are the myths that sustain our imagination and the facts that built our civilization. By honouring both, we honour the full depth of the human journey. The past is not a dead thing to be dissected. It is a living presence that breathes through us every day. And so, we return to the silence, we return to the clay, we return to the quiet, steady rhythm of a world that is watched over by the same stars that saw the first walls of Eridu rise from the mud. The story is complete, the cycle is closed, and the tablets of destiny for this night have been written. Sleep now, in the knowledge that you are safe in the hands of time. The ancient gods are resting, the heroes have finished their quests, and the desert winds are whispering a final, soft lullaby over the ruins of Sumer. The weight of the day has been lifted, and the absu of sleep is opening its doors to you. Drift down into the cool, dark waters, where wisdom and dreams are one. Let the echoes of the cuneiform fade into the beating of your own heart. The night is yours, the peace is yours, and the ancient memories of humanity are now a part of your own silent story. Good night, and may your journey through the stars of your own mind be as vast and as beautiful as the world the Anunnaki first looked upon at the dawn of time. Sleep and find your rest in the eternal silence of the ancient world. Good night.